And welcome back, everybody, to Double Down with Breslo, where we cover everything going on in the exciting world of sports betting, exploding here in the U.S. And we're thrilled to have the COO of SportsGrid, which is a 24/7 betting network, the leading betting network in the sports betting industry. I'll dare to say, I'm sure you would probably agree. Welcome to the show, Adam Kaplan. Thanks so much for joining.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I was not familiar with SportsGrid before you and I connected, but looks like a space that is a very smart one to be in right now. We've certainly got lots of 24/7 sports networks, starting, of course, with ESPN many moons ago. I'm old enough to remember when ESPN started, and I think probably ping pong was their top sport that they were covering live at that time, and grown from there, and now they're back to probably covering pickleball. So it's kind of come full circle for them. They've got so many channels, and there's such a demand now for live sports. But now, thanks to the expansion of sports betting in the U.S., we've got this huge demand for sports betting content. So walk us through how the company started and where you guys are today.
Yeah, so the company started with our founders, Jeremy Stein and Lou Mayon, really back in 2018 is when it came into its current form. And, essentially the thesis was, there's a white space in the sports betting media ecosystem. Again, this is kind of back in 2018. Let's go after a 24/7 round the clock dedicated sports network that serves the sports fan, the betting enthusiast, the fantasy player with the most up-to-date news, information, stats, data analysis, sort of like the CNBC for sports betting around the clock. And I think ultimately, the focus has been on that. The focus has been on owning, the content and the worldwide rights to the content. And what that allows us to do is distribute our content everywhere, right? So subscription services, pay services, free services. And, the SportsGrid network today is really comprised of several pillars. The first is, the streaming video channel, which also has the fast channel, which we'll talk about fast channels, but it's essentially free ad-supported streaming television. It's one of the fastest growing areas of media. SportsGrid is the #1 sports fast channel since Q4 2022. And we have distribution on over 90% of the connected TVs in circulation, where we're preloaded as the sort of #1, as the only sports betting network, but #1 sports channel. And from a consumer perspective, they don't have to download anything or pay for anything. But we also plug in with, your streaming, your OTT kind of platform, satellite, radio, audio, podcast, social media. We recently launched a new app, which is another sort of endpoint for consumers to engage with SportsGrid content. And so ultimately, that and podcasts kind of make up the SportsGrid network.
So if somebody wants to watch it for free, they can, and where would they go to watch it for free?
Well, you can always, through the SportsGrid app, get both the television feed and the audio feed in the palm of your hand with the SportsGrid app. But if you have a smart TV that's hooked up to wireless internet or internet period, there's a 90% chance that you can go on your television, and in the package of channels that your television's offering, in the case of my Samsung, it's Samsung TV Plus, they sort of preload each TV with, a basket of channels across multiple categories. And SportsGrid is one of the 48 sports channels that comes preloaded on Samsung devices, all kind of shapes and sizes, including phones. But I think ultimately, Samsung's one example. We're also distributed on LG, TCL, Hisense, and growing.
What about Roku? That's the one that I tend to use.
So Roku, we are a fast channel on Roku. Roku's a different type of platform, being that obviously, it has some, sort of app components and premium components. We are, in the free channel area of Roku as well. So all in all, we're reaching over 500 million devices every day. And I think ultimately, the real opportunity for us is, mobile and global.
So I had not heard the term fast channel before, so I'm going to assume that a lot of people haven't. So explain to us a fast channel.
Yeah, it's free ad-supported streaming TV. And I think the way to think about this is pretty simple. Like, ultimately, in the old days, you had your set box and your antennas, right? And then eventually, television kind of broadcast consumption evolved into cable and satellites, et cetera. And I think where the world's going, there's a big debate right now whether fast channels, again, being preloaded on connected TVs, on your smart TVs, accessible via Wi-Fi with no payment, no download. There's a real debate right now in media as to whether fast channels are going to replace cable, or, sort of sit alongside and complement, or are they kind of the next generation of cable? And there's probably a spectrum to that end. And, I think ultimately what we're seeing is fast channels are extremely hot right now. They're one of the fastest growing areas of media because consumers will always pay up for their premium content. But I do think there's a point where, for any consumer, you don't want to just keep paying endlessly for apps. So there is a real market for free ad supported. And I think you're seeing that with a lot of the streaming companies start to go that direction.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I guess you could there's two things that I've seen when I deal with wireless television. One is where it pops up all the different things you can click on, which is your Netflix and your HBO and your Disney and so forth. And then I've also seen where it looks more like a cable channel interface where you can just scroll through tons of channels that are available. And like, I know CBS has a 24/7 news thing that you don't necessarily see on cable. There's a lot of channels on there that you don't typically see on your regular cable network. So are both of those things fast channels or one is and one isn't?
Yeah, I think you have your OEMs, which are coming preloaded with channels that are fast channels, but you also have, for example, a lot of our other distribution partners are launching their own versions of fast channels, not just the OEMs. And so what you're seeing is, for example, Amazon Prime, right? Prime Video. So we're also distributed on Prime Video through Freevee, and we're on Fire TV. So we have a global distribution partnership with Amazon, which we announced in February this year. But on Amazon, they're embracing free ad-supported streaming content as well in their environment through their Freevee product, which is, being distributed across, their important kind of consumer app touch points. And so that's one example. I think
sorry to interrupt. Do you get a channel number when you're on something like that?
In the case of Freevee, no. In the case of Samsung, we're channel 1160. So
okay.
It depends on the platform.
Sometimes you do and sometimes you don't. Sometimes it's just a matter of scrolling to find it or searching to find it.
Yeah, but one of the cool things for us is on sportsgrid.com, there's a section we have on the website called Where to Watch, where you can always go get an updated view of where you can watch SportsGrid for free. So I would point your listeners to sportsgrid.com/where to watch. And, you can also just go to the website and navigate easily to find it. But ultimately, what you're seeing from us is, ubiquitous distribution across all the different categories of streaming, OTT, and connected devices. Mm-hmm. And so it's everybody from your Rokus, your YouTube TVs, Amazon Prime, Freevee, Fire, your Sirius XM or the Sirius XM, betting channel. You've got Sling and Fubo TV, Zumo, I could go on forever. You probably
and one distinction between, let's say, you and ESPN is it correct that I couldn't get ESPN without paying for it somehow? I would either have to subscribe to ESPN or I'd have to have, basic cable that gives me ESPN. Whereas yours, no, you don't need either of those things.
Yeah. So ESPN, you can access through pay TV. So you have a cable subscription, which you're paying a cable company. They're paying ESPN a fee for you subscribing to your cable, right? Or you can pay them directly through ESPN Plus and their app, which you have to download, but you also can pay them for plus content. I believe they also have some, free content that they use to kind of market into there. But ultimately, you're paying for that content in some way.
Right. So what's interesting is people don't necessarily think that much about this, but ESPN is making money two ways. It's getting a piece of the subscription fee that you're paying to your cable company, right? Or what you're paying directly to them. Plus they're getting all the ad revenue, which is kind of interesting, right? They've got two major revenue streams there. They've got subscription fees, and then they've got the ad revenue.
Correct. And for us, I think our view is we own the worldwide rights to our programming. We want to make our content available everywhere in an ad-supported environment without restrictions, because with those kinds of sub fees come restrictions on what you can do with your content. And I think it's just a trade-off in terms of your business model and what your strategy is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, now when you get a smart TV, there's so many things that are available to you with that it would cause you to think, well, gee, why do I need cable anymore? There's plenty of news channels, there's sports channels and this and that. I mean, I guess what ESPN is relying upon, of course, is they've got the live sports and people want to see those live events. So they're going to pay for it.
Yeah, and we think there'll always be a place for premium live sporting events and premium content, period. It's just ultimately, I think, like we said, there is a point where the consumer is going to, reach kind of its tipping point in terms of like what they're willing to pay for. And ultimately that opens up a demand and a lane for free ad supported content as well.
So the ads that are on your particular channel, are they sports betting ads? So
we are fortunate to work with many of the top operators in the US. They're among our biggest, sponsors and partners. So like FanDuel and BetMGM are two of our big partners, but also we work with really all the operators are buying commercials, through various channels on our platform. But I think in terms of, the way we work with distribution companies to distribute our platform and share in the ads somehow. And then ultimately what we're working on, on our end is integrated sponsorships where we can really integrate the sports betting operator or whatever the sort of brand is into our content in a really native and organic way that goes across our entire, distribution footprint or the largest swath of our distribution footprint.
So you guys are streaming 24 hours a day. How much of that is actually live content?
18 hours on video and 21 on audio.
And when it's streaming live, I did catch some of it, preparing for the interview. It looked like the guys are kind of following sports events that are going on and talking about them as they're going on, right?
So I think what you're referring to is probably In-Game Live, which is our most watched show where essentially our talent and experts from around the industry are watching games, and it's almost like a betting red zone where they're kind of watching, meets CNBC, I would say. Betting red zone meets CNBC, where it's like they're watching the games, they're watching the line movement, they're helping, with what's going on, and then also where the opportunities are, but also kind of bouncing around to where the action is and where the kind of pivot points are. And so I think for us, it's really the only show in the market where, you have experts and hosts and analysts showing up and analyzing live betting in that manner. Every single moment there are live events on. So we're really proud of that, and obviously always focused on improving. But, I think ultimately that is, kind of our bread and butter and what we do.
Mm-hmm. So would you say those are your most popular shows, is when the games are actually going on?
Yeah, I think those kind of key moments in sports nationally, we sort of mirror in a lot of ways those key moments because the engagement is so heightened. And so, ultimately for us, the magic is when there are games on.
Yeah. And how do you balance the fact that somebody wants to be watching the game, but they also want to be watching or at minimum listening to what you guys are saying about it?
Yeah, that's making our content accessible. So many of our viewers are watching us in the palm of their hand and the game on their TV, or us on their TV and the game in the palm of their hand. And so I think ultimately, and that's if they don't have a 2, or 3 TV kind of strategy. You can also listen to us on radio. We're available, we have a terrestrial footprint, but also, the Sirius XM broadcast. So it's, meeting our customers where they are, and understanding that, we are not enabling them to transact on screen, at least yet. But I think ultimately what we can do is be there and be as accessible as possible so that however they are consuming the action, if they are consuming the action, we're enabling them to consume our content, consume the action, or just consume our content and then bet on the action.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, these days everybody's got more than one screen available to them, whether you call it a phone or a computer or a pad or a monitor. There's always multiple in a room. All right, well, let's take our break right now, and we'll come back after the break. I want to cover a little bit about Adam's background and what got him into sports betting. A really interesting story about a company that started and sold to FanDuel. We'll be back right after the break with more with Adam Kaplan.
Hi everyone, I'm Veronica Dudo, and welcome to Buy,
Hold, Sell. If you have the Russians that are going into Ukraine, the Americans and the Germans and everyone else in Europe is going to say, hell no.
If Russia doing things, logically was their MO, I'd agree with you. Yeah, Todd, why don't you get him on a phone call right now? Hello, you.
In a world where secrets have consequences and lies can't be hidden forever, immerse yourself in the gripping new thriller No Lie Lives Forever by Todd M. Schoenberger. Join Wall Street hedge fund manager Travis Carmichael as he delves deeper into a web of corruption and conspiracy, finding himself entangled in a high-stakes game where souls are at stake, and trust is a luxury he can't afford. Critics and readers can't get enough of this heart-pounding page-turner, calling it a masterfully crafted suspense novel that will leave you breathless. No Lie Lives Forever is a masterfully crafted thriller that will leave you guessing until the very end. With its intricate plot twists and unforgettable characters, this is a must-read for fans of suspense and mystery. From the mind of acclaimed author Todd M. Schoenberger comes a novel that will challenge your perceptions and keep you turning the pages late into the night. Critics and readers alike can't get enough of No Lie Lives Forever. It's been hailed as a gripping roller coaster ride, a true page-turner that will leave you breathless. Don't miss your chance to uncover the truth. Immerse yourself in the suspenseful world of No Lie Lives Forever by Todd M. Schoenberger. Available now on Amazon and at finer bookstores near you.
Welcome back, everybody, to Double Down with Breslo. We're talking with Adam Kaplan, COO of SportsGrid, 24/7 live streaming sports betting coverage. Talk to us about, I guess it was your entree into sports betting, the company Numberfire.
Yeah, so Numberfire was at the time coined the next generation sports analytics platform, and it was founded by the CEO Nick Bonadio, who I came to meet in 2013. And ultimately, I think the thesis was, at the time there was a plethora of data around sports, and there was really no consumer-facing platform out there trying to harness all that data and package it in a way where consumers could use it to inform fantasy and sports betting type decisions. Ultimately, taking the data, using different types of modeling and forecasting techniques to forecast player and team performance, and then look through the lens of fantasy or daily fantasy or sports betting. and over time, more and more different offerings. So ultimately, Nick founded the company and built a really strong team that I had the pleasure of working with. And it was, a really, kind of forming time for me of like, becoming sort of what I was hopeful I could become in the industry, and setting out in the early sort of days to sort of prove ourselves. Right. And so you always look back on those times with fond memories. I think ultimately in 2015, we sold the business to Nigel Eccles, who was the CEO of FanDuel at the time, and Matt King, who was the CFO of FanDuel at the time, then came back as CEO. Now he's CEO of Fanatics Betting and Gaming. And that was really the starting point for content at FanDuel, is that initial sort of number fire platform, and what we were able to not only build into the product, but create in terms of web presences, create app presences, and really use the data foundation to evolve a bunch of systems and technologies that existed at FanDuel.
Mm-hmm. So where was the revenue coming from for number fire?
Yeah, so it was a three-pronged approach. We had a subscription business, which was a seven-figure subscription business annually. Like, in the very early days, there were, I think there weren't a lot of competitive subscription products. I think over the years, there became to be more and more. And so we were in a position where we could offer that. We also had an advertising business. I know for sure DraftKings was one of our big partners back in the day on the advertising side. And then we also had an enterprise licensing side of the business, where we would take a lot of this data and license it out to major media companies, teams, leagues, and at times develop new products for, some of these different offerings and entities. And our biggest customers, I remember, were the ESPN and kind of the NFL, and kind of getting a crash course and working with both of those organizations, coming from the world I was coming from at the time, which was not sports and media. So it's, like I said, the number fire days were a time period that I look back on very fondly. And, obviously it was kind of, like you said, the starting point for my career in sports.
And then why did FanDuel want it?
FanDuel was getting into content, I think saw value in the IP and the team, and, ultimately needed, a foundation for content that was smart and logic driven to get into. And I think number fire was that for the FanDuel DFS business.
Mm-hmm. So, and that brings us full circle back to SportsGrid. Where is SportsGrid relative to, say, a FanDuel and a DraftKings, which, my understanding, they're also doing 24/7 content now?
Well, I don't think they're doing 24/7 content. I would say this, I mentioned earlier, many of the top operators in the US are our partners and sponsors, and they're valued partners of ours. I would say that those operator partners are gaming operators, and ultimately they look through the lens of, their gaming operations and how they can improve those operations and grow those businesses. I think ultimately, if you look at the streaming landscape right now, which we've sort of done already in this interview, it's just evolving so quickly. And the fastest growing areas we've talked about are fast channels, which are essentially free and ad supported streaming channels on connected TVs. So if you really take a look at the strategies of, the operators in the US and kind of double click on it, I would say that you could summarize it by saying that they're gaming operators that have various content initiatives. And in the case of, the strategies, I think FanDuel took their horse racing paid TV network and essentially, changed the color, changed the brand name, just rebranded it, sprinkled in some sports content, some sports betting content. But the core of that channel is horse racing, and they air in excess of 12 hours a day of live horse racing coverage from around the world. I think for DraftKings, they acquired VSiN, which was a premium subscription content company. and ultimately, recently launched on Samsung with the Samsung TV Plus offering, which we are obviously valued Samsung as a partner as well. And I think, for them, that's a great start, and they could feel really good about entering that business, but they're not live streaming throughout the day, all day. It's a lot of, kind of re-air, and it's a lot of the content that, they're already sponsoring across their various different content sponsorships. And I think in the case of both of these companies, and frankly, the rest of the long tail of operators in the US, they have various other initiatives. We've talked about NumberFire for FanDuel, but others have different websites and apps and social media, podcasts, YouTube, Twitch. And I think you get varying degrees of cut through. And in a lot of cases, there can be reach and frequency issues. There can be issues attributing value to the gaming business, because remember, they're gaming companies. You can have monetization issues if they're not getting the reach and frequency. And obviously, in some cases, costs can be high if you're running a broadcast pay TV business, or if you're sort of running at a high cost structure. That could be challenging, especially if you have some of the other challenges that we mentioned there. So ultimately, at SportsGrid, what we do is we show up every day to have the sports bettors back with the news, analysis, data, insights, and movements that they need to be smarter at the water cooler, but also more informed when they do place bets. And our distribution strategy is ubiquitous. We own the worldwide rights to our programming, so we have no restrictions around where we can put our content. As as such, you can find our channel everywhere. And, we've already kind of gone through where a lot of, kind of the key platforms are, but we're reaching over 500 million devices. And we're the number one sports fast channel, which, obviously fast is a key growing area of the media market. So we're really fortunate to be in the position we're in. We don't take it for granted. We work hard every day to defend our position. And we know that competition's coming. But I think ultimately, with the team that we have and, the group that we have going, the business we built, it feels like we're going to be in a position to defend our turf for years.
Do you see value to you guys being independent? Do bettors kind of look with some question at an analyst who's working for FanDuel or DraftKings and think, oh, well, we know who their employer is. They might be trying to steer us in a particular direction because FanDuel or DraftKings wants wagers on that side?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's clear that there is a market in the consumer market for a Switzerland approach to media, and especially sports betting, news, media, and entertainment. I think if you're FanDuel or you're DraftKings, there's obviously value to the brand. They've put tremendous money into the brand. And, in our case, we haven't put that kind of money into the brand, but we're building our brand. And, more and more people are learning about SportsGrid and are able to recognize SportsGrid, without being prompted. So sort of unaided brand awareness is kind of one of the things we look at. Ultimately, I feel like for consumers, they want to have choice. They all play on multiple wallets and tend to focus on where they can get value, whether it's, sort of material value or, sort of adjacent value as a consumer, if it's, maybe not the best line or the best promotion, but they have something else going, with that brand, whether it's content or, what have you, convenience, or they're just really focused on kind of price shopping or promo shopping or what have you. But ultimately, whatever.
Speaking of that, it just raised a question in my mind. I'm curious, do your analysts or hosts provide that type of shopping information? For instance, a game's coming up Are they telling people in real time, hey, FYI guys, DraftKings have them -7.5 and they're -8 over on FanDuel, so you can pick up a half point on FanDuel?
Yeah, some of our programming is focused on highlighting some of the best opportunities for you to get expected value. And I think it obviously depends on the programming. Some of our programming is sponsored by FanDuel, and we tend to highlight FanDuel markets. Some of our programming is sponsored by BetMGM, and we'll highlight BetMGM markets, et cetera. But I do think, within our content, there's a focus and an effort on trying to help users find value.
Mm-hmm. And how much are you guys international at this point? If I'm following a soccer game in Britain, are you guys commenting on that?
So we are global and, focused on growing quickly there. As we mentioned, we have a few global distribution deals. So that kind of sets the table for us to launch in different markets. Earlier this year, we launched our dedicated Canadian network. Later this year, we'll debut our Spanish language network in key Spanish language markets, including the US, but also, Mexico, Latin America, Spain, and et cetera. And we are announcing a few new launches that we already have lined up that are going to be announced shortly that I think will, sort of show the world where we're going.
Cool. So right now you've got SportsGrid, you got one channel, which is focused primarily on US sports, but you're going to have a second focused on Canadian sports and then a third focused on Latin American sports?
We already have the SportsGrid Canada network. That one launched earlier this year. And then the Spanish language network launches later this year.
Gotcha. So each one will be independent with 24/7 coverage.
Yeah.
Cool. And what about, what else should we look for in the future as far as direction you guys are going that you're able to share? For instance, do you see yourself ever being on the wager side of things where you actually could have a side business where you're accepting wagers or facilitating them directly through your programming?
Listen, I wouldn't rule anything out. Right now, we're focused on our ambitions in media. There's a big opportunity in media, obviously, to focus this model on global reach and scale and really build out a comprehensive media company in the space, which we're well on our way to, but, still have room to improve. And so, for us, I think we're very focused on the media side of the business now, but if the right opportunities came along, I'm sure we would entertain anything if it could add value to, our team, our shareholders, and the company.
Cool. Last question. Who's your number one personality right now? You hate to give it to just one of your hosts, I guess. It's probably going to be controversial for you to say that.
Well, I was going to say, are you looking for me to give my favorite SportsGrid personality? Are you looking for me to give my favorite non-SportsGrid personality?
No. SportsGrid.
Well, it's really
like, tell us who, hey, if you haven't watched SportsGrid yet, this is the guy you want to start with.
It's really hard to pick just one. Here's what I would say. I'll highlight a few. And I think, of course, like the team at large does a phenomenal job. So, there are many people who, deserve a lot of praise and credit. But I would say this. I would say, Scott Farrell has been in the business for a very long time and, has a lot of loyal fans in his corner. And he's got, a show and a key time slot on our network. You've got really solid people working in the morning day parts. So like you've got Ben Stevens, who's a tremendous talent on our FanDuel programming, as well as Kevin Walsh, who's on our FanDuel programming. And those guys know, the business of sports betting, in terms of from a consumer perspective, how to handicap and also, how to really communicate where the news and the action is. And then I think, throughout different parts of the day, you've got news programming and fantasy programming with Craig Mish and Davis Maddock. You've got, Gabe Morency, who is a favorite of many. He does a tremendous job for us late night on radio, but also on Game Time Decisions, which is on live right now. And he's there with Cam Stewart, who also does a nice job for us. Those guys will also stick around for in-game live. So if you want to come watch in-game live in an hour or two, you'll have the opportunity to do that. And, we have a number of key up and coming folks, whether it's, Donnie Rightside, whether it's Dubs Anderson or Taylor Mathis, Joe Madden, James Young been a tremendous basketball talent for us. And so, obviously there's many more. It's a tremendous roster. And, when it comes to sports betting and informing the sports bettor, there is no better roster.
Yep. Sounds like a deep bench.
Indeed.
Adam, thanks a lot for coming on the show. Sorry I'm not going to see you in San Diego next week, but maybe on the East Coast soon.
Yep, let's do it. Thanks for having me.
All right, Adam Kaplan, COO of SportsGrid. Thank you so much for joining Double Down, and thank you all for listening and watching to Double Down. We'll be back soon with another episode. Thanks, everyone.
I want you to smash that like button.